Today I was working on one of my Node.js projects, and this very interesting thing came into my mind about the use of async await functions in for each loop. And I will get straight to the point. I want you to give me the output of this console log, which is here. I will tell you what this function does. So basically, I've created this messages array. This is a results array which I've created, and I'm iterating in each of those my messages array. I've created this fake fetch to return a promise. Iterating in each of those messages, pushing the results to my results array. Simple. I want you to give me the output of this console log statement. You can take your time, 5 seconds, right? So if you guys thought that this will give me a array of promises or something, I have this very interesting result in front of you. This will give you an empty array. It just iterates in each of those function and give control back to the outer callback. So in my case, my outer callback is nothing but the main execution. But instead of waiting anything here, because you see the async function is this one, so my await will be awaited. So await always awaits inside an async function. So for example, if I'm putting await here, it does not mean that my entire code is blocked. It just means that this function process is waited till here, and this function is inside this for each function. But the role of for each function is not to make sure that this gets executed. This just runs this function synchronously and gives control to the outer callback, which is this console log statement. Alright, so now I've changed sequence a bit. I have used a for off loop inside my async function, and I'm doing similar things, but just used for off loop. I have this async function where I have wrapped this whole for off loop. This is just an immediately invoked function where I'm just getting the console of this. Take your time, take your 3 seconds, and tell me the output of this. Alright, so I hope you have guessed the output of this. And if you think, or if you understood but I told you about forEach, then you might be right about the answer. But if you didn't, then here's the output of this that will clear your doubts. As you can see, I don't get an empty array now. The reason for this is because my for loop is inside this async callback, and this is not inside a for each loop. The issue before, if you see here, was that my for each loop, this one, was executing this async callback function, but it is not. It is so my await statement is inside this async function. So my await statement will wait inside this async function, but my for each loop will execute to the next outer function, outer callback, because it does not return anything. It just executes, iterates on each of those messages and give control back to my outer callback loop. But in this example, what I have is I just have one main async call function. I don't run that inside a for each loop. So I just run my immediate invoked function here, and I get the result of each of those inside it. So the issue before was about the order. This function was inside a for each loop, and my for each loop's behavior is not to wait for my function irrespective of the promises on anything. My await waits inside a async function, not inside the whole application. This was to clear your doubts about the ordering and working of for each loops and other loops as well. Now I want you to tell me one more thing. I want you to tell me, is this the best approach to handle this scenario? Like, I have array of messages and I'm just doing one by one execution and waiting for each of them to complete, waiting for each of the promises to complete. Do you think this is the best approach? I'm pretty sure you guys think of course not, and there is something called Promise.all, which we can use. Alright, we'll look into that now. So I have wrote this Promise.all function to handle that better. I'm doing similar thing but just using a Promise.all. Promises is just an array of promises. As you can see, I'm just putting promises into my array and as you can see, that just awaiting all of those promises. Okay, so it's kind of parallel fetching going on. Now what will be the output? Let's see. Okay, you saw in before the code before, so this is the code before I will execute it. You see the time it is taking, and with this, with new code, you will see the time it is taking. It is way faster. But again, is this the best approach? If I am making an API call, I have 100 of API calls. Every time I make that API call, it's not guaranteed that all of my API calls will work and execute correctly. In that case, do you think Promise.all is the best function? You should use something called Promise.all settled instead of Promise.all. Because in Promise.all, if any of my promise will fail, I will get an exception and my next processes will break. But in Promise.all settled, I can get the output of each of them and handle them separately. So if any of them fails, I can handle them separately instead of breaking my whole flow. So this is an example where I am showing you what will happen if any of the promise fails in my promises array. Let's see what happens. You see, my in when one of the promise will fail, I will get an exception and my flow will break. Let's see what will happen if I use Promise.all settled. Now you see, I'm getting all settled results, and I'm also getting an error out of which one was failed, and third one was fulfilled successfully. And if I use Promise.all, you will see if each of my promise will fail, I get an exception. In this case, I don't get an exception, but at the same time, I can see which of the promise was failed and handle that promise exception separately. So this is a very simple fundamentals which I showed you should use when handling multiple promises, and these are not language specific. All of these ideas works in any of the languages. If you're using Python or any of other languages, these things going to be very helpful. In Java Spring Boot, we have something called completable future. So this idea of handling each of the promise exception separately and handling multiple promises parallelly using Promise.all, and also at the same time learning where my code is blocked when using a wait. And I hope to bring many cool such system designs and design patterns to you which you can learn from. Thank you so much.